that brings us to the next topic of discussion because clearly they're so ashamed of the original Kratos that they have opted to start the Amazon series with the Kratos from the last two games, right? Which was interesting, but not surprising. As we've discussed on this video so far, the people that are currently in the room do not have the stomach to actually write the, start from the very first game. Because if they did, they would have to include everything from that game, which would include a lot of violence, sexuality, and things that are now deemed untouchable in Hollywood. All right. So they recognize that they could not do Kratos justice, and if they tried to, they would have to censor the hell out of the character. So they've started with the modern version of Kratos. The God of War First Look reviews a video game accurate take on the Kratos in Prime TV. So the video game accurate. There's nothing accurate here, and I have two thoughts on this. Right. First is just my first impression on looking at the image that we got with Kratos and Atreus. So let me just go through what is here. With that comes the first look and image of stars Ryan Hurst and Callum Vinson on the in the roles of Kratos and Atreus, the iconic characters they portray in the live-action adaptations of PlayStation's massively popular ancient mythology-themed God of War game. The casting. Oh, Ryan Hurst. I have no idea who this guy is, to be honest with you. Um, as I said, I have a few thoughts where the casting is concerned and the photos that was released, but I think people are largely focusing on the wrong thing here. But before I get into that, we'll just address the casting. He looks fine. That's my first impression. He looks fine, right? I'm not touching my pearls and saying he looks terrible or anything of that effect. The problem is that he just looks fine, and he shouldn't just look fine. He should look ridiculously amazing as Kratos, right? This is your first image that you're sharing with the audience to get them in the frame of mind to be excited for this product, and this is what you put out. His posture. People are already joking that it looks like he's taking a dump in the forest, which he kind of does. But I would say it's not just the posture; it's also the wardrobe, and it leans into that conversation of did we need a live action adaptation for this? I think certain mediums between animation and video games allow some creative freedoms that don't translate necessarily to live action, and that's one of the issues that we're seeing here. The armor that he's wearing, it's accurate. It is accurate, but in a real world setting, it looks absurd, right? It just looks like cosplay, and we saw something similar happen with Lara Croft's Tomb Raider series that is coming out, and the photos that they released with the actress that's going to be Sansa that's going to be filling in that role, and it was the same thing. The clothing she wore was accurate, but it looked like she was just someone dressed in cosplay, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. It's the same thing. It's the same effect, and the reason you're getting that effect is because video game creates this lens, and it's the same thing with animation as well, where you're allowed to suspend that sense of disbelief and just dive straight into the story and accept what's being presented to you. That doesn't exist in live action. It doesn't, because live action doesn't leave much to the imagination. What you see exactly is what you're getting, and what you're getting here is just a cheap look of what the character is. There's just nothing there to excite you. So I'm a firm believer in that we didn't need this live action adaptation, and that we don't need to adapt everything to live action. And that's one of the first problems here. if they were going to do this well, they would have to change the character's wardrobe a bit. And I would say take some inspirations from, shows like Vikings, right? And what the characters would have been wearing at the time, because that it suits the world that we're in more accurately, right? You wouldn't necessarily see any of them dressed like this because it just doesn't make any sense. And if you do go that direction and you change his wardrobe too much, then it feels like you're not doing Kratos anymore. You're just doing a random guy. So that is the problem. This did not need an adaptation, but if it is, you are going to do it. You are going to have to make some changes here, and to his wardrobe and make him look a bit more realistic. And again, you don't want video games to be realistic, but that's what you're trying to do when you do live action. You are trying to be more realistic, and it takes players out of this myth that they've built up in their mind of what they expect the character to look like and act like, and it's just going to be ruined, unfortunately. Yeah, I believe these mediums need to be kept separate. There's no need for this. There just isn't. If they were going to do this, the closest medium to accurately adapt this would be animation. It would just be animation, right? Because again, it allows the player that freedom to imagine what is being presented before them. If the moment you set it in live action, it just pulls you out of the fantasy of it all, and it just feels that you're intended to take this at face value, that this is real, and that if it's real, it's sort of absurd. There's some level of absurdity involved in it, right? So it removes the veil from the audience, and yeah, it's what it reveals is not great. It's not great. So that's my first issue. It's just the entire adaptation process and trying to bring the character to live action in the first place. I think that is already problematic, and the outfit is just wrong. Even though it's accurate, it's wrong because you're trying to be realistic, and this just makes no sense here. Yeah, so that's the first issue. The casting, again, the character looks fine. He does not look particularly, like Kratos really, but he's fine. I've seen people complain about him not sorry. I've seen people complain about him not looking as jacked. But obviously if they did that, they would have to cast maybe a bodybuilder. And the question would then be, can that person act? There's always a trade-off, right? And it's unfortunately, as gamers, or we sort of have to recognize that people who would fit physically in these roles spent their lives focusing on just their physique, not necessarily their other talents, and where acting is concerned. So they may not deliver a good performance, and which is more important, that's up to you. But there is going to be a trade-off somewhere. And unfortunately, in this case, it's he's not as big as you'd expect Kratos to be, but Kratos is obviously unrealistically large. I'm sure, yeah, you can get men who are that, in that physique, but for that person to then, you know, jump around, do all these acrobatics that we see Kratos do, it's not, that is not going to happen, right? So there is a trade-off there. Now, as I've said, people are focusing on the wrong thing here. The main issue with this is not, uh, is not the wardrobe or the casting. No, it's the fact that they opted to start in this era for Kratos, and I won't retread too much of what we've already discussed, but it's along the same lines of needing to soften Kratos' edge to make him more palatable to the modern audience, and that's what we're attempting to do here by casting this Kratos, right? We see a similar deconstruction happening with James Bond as well. Ironically, all these characters are, between Tomb Raider, Kratos, and James Bond all going to Amazon, and Amazon appears to have the same, um, DEI quotas, and that it needs to meet that Netflix does, right? It's taking all the talking points from Netflix. And as you've seen with James Bond, at least from what we've been reading about the direction they want to take the character, or the game that is being that will be coming out soon. Most likely they'll look at the game to sort of gauge whether they're going in the right direction or not. But I'm not sure that they'll deviate from it, even if the audience response is poor. Because once you've seen the trailer for the first James Bond game, you recognize that that is not James Bond. That's just a regular character, with the James Bond title slapped onto it. He doesn't act like James Bond. He doesn't hit on, specifically. James Bond is supposed to be a womanizer. That's one of his character. You can call it a flaw if you want. I personally don't. But that's one of his character traits, right? Is that he is a bit of a womanizer, but he's a super secret spy. That is what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to try to fit in. Use his charisma to get close to these people, and largely that means getting information from a lot of these women. It's interesting when we watch media and we see where female spies get involved, and they're doing the same thing that Bond would have done in order to get close to a target. They'll use their sensuality and get close to these male characters, and then kill them, and people cheer. Hooray, she's done a great job. But the moment it's flipped and there's a man doing this, a male spy doing the same thing, all of a sudden it's misogynistic and it's wrong. But it's the same thing that we're seeing there. That version of James Bond that we've seen in the trailers for the game so far is just horrendous. That's not Bond. He's just taking basically leads from all these women who are giving him orders. And it just goes back to what I've said before about gamers, not just gamers, but anyone who enjoys these stories, whether it's video game, novels, movies. You need to draw a line, right? And I've personally said, people have looked at the last Daniel Craig films and said that that's where they're seeing a decline in what Bond is supposed to be. And they'll share the meme of him riding on the back of the motorcycle versus the older films where he was driving the motorcycles. But I think the line was crossed long before that. The line was crossed the moment they swapped the character of M from the novels, because M was a man in the novels, in the James Bond novels. He was a man. And then they had Judi Dench come in and play M. And then ever since that change, M has always been a woman, right? And you, as I've said, once you give them one line to cross, they will continue to push those boundaries. They've continued to make M a woman throughout, and then they've slowly chipped away and softened Bond's edge to make him more modern, softer and less toxic masculinity is their obvious goal. But it all started then. The moment you allowed them to say, okay, M is now a woman, and now Bond takes orders from a woman, and then 007 was a woman, and then they started having conversations about having a female Bond. So, and that is the exact thing that we're seeing play out here in God of War. Likewise, slightly different, but again, all these girl boss women that you're seeing popping up between Freya and Faye here, that is how they get in. They ask you to accept this one change, you say yes, then the next time it's another change, then it's another change, and another, until the character is completely unrecognizable. But the TV show, I have very little hope that this will be good. And I don't think anyone should at this point. We've all seen the writing on the wall. We know where this is heading. And if this is going to follow the game, the last two games, Ah, yeah. We know they're going to maintain that same BEI hiring for a lot of the characters. And I honestly, I think they're going to go even further. I think they will go even further than what the games have done. Right? I I know it's difficult to imagine that things getting worse, but keep in mind for a lot of the game, even though it's a movie game, there's a lot of cutscenes that's just irritating. The, the games still do require player interaction, right? And so for a TV series, they will need to fill in the gaps where Kratos is not, where the gameplay is no longer there. They will need to fill that gap. So be prepared for them to inject all these stories to, deconstruct Kratos and all these characters that we'll see around, inject all these, feminist talking points and all these things. Yeah, yeah. As I said before, it will become a lifetime drama. That is going to be the goal, right? This is being created to appeal to all audiences. So it's not made for men, it's made for women. And if the men are interested, then they can tune in. That's really what it comes down to. So an unfortunate day, an unfortunate week for the God of War fans. I mourn for you, unfortunately. But hopefully, once they've seen a lot of the backlash for at least for the game, maybe something can change there. I doubt it very much. And for the TV show, I do not believe that they will change anything. If you've seen what has happened with the Rings of Power series, they have just doubled down on that season after season, and to the point now where some of the things that people overlooked in the first game, like Dooney's wife, his annoying wife. He's now being featured on the cover for the new season. I'm like, why are you at the forefront? And then I remember the last season, she was giving more screen time or as much screen time as Dooney's father, who is the king, or even Dooney himself. And so they were pushing her to the forefront. Yeah, and I checked out, right? Because it's clear as day that this is where they're taking the series. So if Amazon has not changed course where that is concerned, do not expect them to change anything to respond to the audience feedback on this project as well. They will push that same narrative, and I genuinely believe this will be even worse than the last two video games. Yeah, that is the unfortunate reality of where we are with a lot of these game franchises. And as I've said, the only solution here, guys, is vote with your wallet. You have to draw a line. You can either keep watching these characters, beloved characters, watch them continually be deconstructed and their edges softened and emasculated. As you keep making exceptions for the changes that are made, that is where it's heading. And at a certain point, you have to draw a line and say, no more. Once you have this included, I will not buy your game. I will not watch your show. That is the only way that you will save these characters. As my motto for the channel here is, the stories define culture, and the culture is a reflection of our stories. So we have to safeguard our stories. We have to protect our stories. And at some point, gatekeeping, unfortunately, is one of the ways in which we have to consider doing that. So we'll talk more as we get additional information on both the game and the series. Until then, I'll see you next time.